My name is Violet Montgomery. I was born into a world of marble floors, black-tinted limousines, and silent dinners where emotions were considered weakness. My father, Charles Montgomery, is one of the most powerful industrial magnates in the state, the kind of man whose voice could turn fear into obedience. My mother, Catherine, was always beside him, soft-spoken, perfectly dressed, and afraid to ever disagree. I grew up believing that love had to be earned. From my first ballet recital to my Harvard graduation, I did everything my parents asked. I studied harder than anyone else, smiled at the right people, spoke only when spoken to. And still, it was never enough. Father used to say, "You're a Montgomery, excellence is the least I expect." When I finished Harvard, he didn't congratulate me. He only asked, "No honors? Then the only thing left for you is to marry well. You can't rule the business. That's not a woman's place." He never went to college himself, only finished school, yet he acted as if the world owed him respect simply for his name. So I tried harder. For years I was their perfect daughter, quiet, obedient, polished, until the day I finally broke the rules. 5 years ago, my parents decided my future for me once again. They told me I would marry a man from a good family, a match that would strengthen our social position. The arrangement was made, the date discussed, the press already informed. And I said no. That single word ended my life as I knew it. Father said I shamed the family, that I didn't deserve the Montgomery name. From that day, I wasn't their daughter, just their disappointment. That's when everything truly began to fall apart. When I think back to the moment everything began to unravel, it always starts with Archibald Preston, or as my father liked to call him, the perfect gentleman. The Prestons were practically political royalty. Generations of senators, governors, and board members with straight backs and practiced smiles. Father adored that family, the money, the power, the legacy. To him, the Prestons were everything the Montgomerys were missing to climb another step higher. When I was introduced to Archie, he arrived in a navy suit that looked like it had never bent at the waist. His handshake was firm, but somehow empty, like he'd practiced it in a mirror. He smiled just the right amount, complimented the house, and even thanked my mother for the delightful pastries, which, ironically, had been made by our cook. He was polite, too polite. The kind of man who'd apologize to a wall if he accidentally brushed against it. I remember our first conversation vividly. "So," I asked, "what do you actually enjoy doing, Archibald?" He blinked, confused by the question. "Enjoy?" "Yes," I said. "Something that isn't shaking hands or posing for campaign photos." He cleared his throat. "Well, my father says hobbies are distractions from duty." I almost laughed. That was Archie in a nutshell, a man who would probably marry a coat rack if his parents told him it was politically advantageous. My father adored him instantly. "Solid upbringing, excellent connections," he said. "And Violet, he even stood when your mother entered the room. A true gentleman." I wanted to tell him that Archie probably stood up in his sleep too, out of habit. A week later, they held a dinner with the Prestons to announce the understanding, as they called it. The table was long, the room full of artificial smiles and crystal glasses. The men discussed business, politics, and charity, as if it were all the same thing. The women smiled and nodded at appropriate intervals. When the talk turned to marriage, I felt my chest tighten. No one had asked me if I wanted this. No one even looked at me. They spoke about my life as if I were a property being transferred, elegant, silent, and already sold. So I stood up. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice trembling but clear. "I'm not marrying him." The room went still. Forks froze halfway to mouths. My mother went pale. Archie blinked once, twice, as if trying to process whether this was part of some new engagement ritual. His mother gasped, and his father muttered something about emotional instability. "I don't even know him," I continued. "And even if I did, I wouldn't marry someone who treats love like a business deal." When the Prestons left in outrage, my father's face turned the color of ash. He didn't shout in front of guests. That would have been undignified. But the moment the door closed, he called me into his office. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You've humiliated this family," he said quietly. "You'll stay in this house until you understand what you've done." Then came the slap. Quick, sharp, final. The sound echoed more than the pain. From that day, I wasn't Violet, the heiress. I was the prisoner of the Montgomery mansion. My credit cards were frozen, my phone taken away, my car gone. The world moved on outside those iron gates, and I watched it from my window like a ghost. Almost a year passed that way. A year of silence, of walls, of endless arguments muffled through doors. But if my father thought isolation would break me, he was wrong. Because somewhere between those long, quiet days, I realized something for the first time in my life. I wasn't afraid of losing their world anymore. I was afraid of never escaping it. It was my mother, not my courage, that finally opened the door. After nearly a year of being locked inside the mansion, watching the seasons change through glass, Catherine Montgomery stood quietly in my doorway one afternoon. Her hands were trembling as she held out my coat. "Your father's gone to New York," she whispered. "You have a few hours. Go outside, just don't go far." I didn't ask twice. I didn't even put on gloves, I just ran. The moment the heavy gates closed behind me, I inhaled the cold air like it was something rare and expensive. I'd forgotten how it felt, wind against skin, sunlight on my hair, the sound of distant traffic that wasn't filtered through marble walls. For the first time in months, I felt human again. I walked without a plan, afraid that if I stopped, someone would notice and drag me back. I passed people chatting on benches, children laughing in the park, couples holding hands, ordinary things that used to bore me but now looked like miracles. For a fleeting moment, I thought about running. Truly running. I could disappear, start over somewhere no one knew my last name. But the fantasy ended as quickly as it began. I had no money, no friends, no experience beyond charity galas and piano lessons. I couldn't even buy a bus ticket. My father had made sure of that. I sat on a bench near the lake and watched the ducks glide across the water. A little girl feeding them dropped her bread and smiled at me, an innocent smile, the kind that comes only from people who never learn to fear. I smiled back, but my eyes burned. When the sun began to set, I went home. My mother was waiting by the gate, pale and anxious. She didn't ask where I'd gone. She just took my cold hands and said almost in a whisper, "Promise me you'll be careful, Violet. Your father won't forgive this." Freedom, as I learned, was fragile. It lasted exactly 3 weeks before Father shattered it again. He called me to his office one morning, the same room where he had once struck me. The air was heavy with cigar smoke, the curtains half drawn as if even sunlight wasn't allowed to contradict him. He didn't look up when I entered, just kept signing documents until I was forced to speak first. "You wanted to see me, Father?" He finally raised his eyes, cold, sharp, calculating. "Yes, I've arranged a new engagement for you." My heart sank before he even said the name. "Reginald Davenport," he continued, leaning back in his chair. "You've heard of him, of course. He owns half the rail lines in the Midwest. A man of influence, dignity. He can provide the stability this family needs." I wanted to laugh. Not because it was funny, but because if I didn't, I might scream. "Father, he's 60. 62, he corrected calmly. "But he's not dying, and his fortune isn't either." I stood frozen. It was suddenly clear. This wasn't about me at all. It was about him. Rumors had been circling for months about Montgomery Industries, failed contracts, unpaid debts. I had overheard snippets of conversations through closed doors. For the first time, I saw it plainly. I wasn't a daughter. I was currency. "If you refuse again," he said, lowering his voice, "you will not leave this house. Ever. I'll make sure of it." I nodded, pretending to listen, pretending to agree. That evening, Reginald Davenport came to dinner. He arrived in a tailored suit that seemed to carry its own arrogance. His hair was thinning, his smile rehearsed, and his eyes scanned me like I was a business proposition written in silk. He spoke of his estates, his influence in Washington, and the honor of merging two great names. When he reached for my hand, I smiled. I smiled so convincingly that even my mother looked relieved. Only I knew that behind that smile was a plan. That night, when the mansion fell silent, I packed a small suitcase, just a few clothes, a photo of my mother, and the necklace my grandmother had given me before she died. I waited until the clock struck 2, until even the guards outside seemed half asleep, and then I ran. I didn't take a car. I walked, barefoot at first, down the long gravel road until my feet bled. The air was cold, but the fear of being caught was colder. I didn't know where I was going. I only knew who I could trust. Aunt Helen. She was my father's younger sister, though they hadn't spoken in years. When their parents died, Father had taken the family inheritance for himself, claiming Helen wouldn't know what to do with it anyway. She never forgave him. I took a bus under a false name. It took 2 days and all my courage to reach Wyoming, a small town that felt like another planet. There were no marble floors, no chandeliers, no drivers waiting by the door. Just old houses, open skies, and a wind that smelled like earth instead of money. When Helen opened the door, she didn't recognize me at first. My hair was tangled, my clothes wrinkled, and I was trembling from exhaustion. "Violet?" she whispered, shocked. I broke down before I could answer. Between tears, I told her everything. About Father, about the engagement, about the cage I'd lived in for years. She listened quietly, then pulled me into her arms. "You did the right thing," she said softly. "You're safe now." Safe. It was the first time anyone had said that to me. Her house was small, 1 bedroom, a narrow kitchen, mismatched furniture, but it felt warmer than any mansion I'd ever known. I slept that night on her old couch, clutching my grandmother's necklace, and for the first time in my life, I didn't dream of marble halls. I dreamed of freedom. Life in Wyoming was the opposite of everything I'd ever known. The days moved slowly, the nights were silent, and no one cared about last names or family fortunes. Aunt Helen left early each morning to work at the local grocery, and I stayed home, tending to her small yard. At first, it felt strange to have dirt under my nails instead of manicured hands, to smell like lilacs instead of perfume. But there was something healing about it. Every seed I planted felt like a quiet rebellion against my past, proof that something small could still grow, even after being buried. The town itself was modest, with 1 diner, 1 church, and a post office that seemed to hold the community together. The first time I met Jack Whitmore, I was kneeling by the garden fence, pruning roses. He was leaning on his bicycle, mailbag slung over his shoulder, watching me with that kind of gentle curiosity only small-town people have. "Morning," he said, tipping his cap. "You must be Helen's niece. Haven't seen you around before." I froze for a second, unsure how much to reveal. "Just visiting," I said finally. He smiled. "Well, visiting or not, you've got a green thumb. Helen's roses never looked this good." That became our routine. Jack would deliver the mail around noon, and I'd always find a reason to be outside, watering plants that didn't need it or pretending to rearrange flower pots. He talked easily, laughed easily, and never once asked the kind of questions I feared. Over time, he told me bits of his story. He'd grown up here, left for college in Denver, and dreamed of becoming an architect. But when his grandparents fell ill, he came back to care for them. They passed away soon after, and he stayed. Not because he had to, but because he couldn't leave the only place that still felt like home. There was a quiet strength in him, something real and unpolished. He listened when I spoke, not to respond, but to understand. It was disarming, after years of being spoken at instead of to. Weeks turned into months. One afternoon, as I was hanging laundry, he stopped by without his uniform, just Jack, not the postman. He handed me a small bouquet of wildflowers, the stems still wet. "They were growing near the road," he said shyly. "Figured they looked better here." It was such a simple gesture, but I felt something shift inside me, something I hadn't felt in years. Warmth, safety, belonging. Jack didn't know who I was, Not really. To him, I was just Violet, the quiet girl who loved flowers and lived with her aunt. And for once, that was enough. In his company, I forgot I was a Montgomery. I forgot about marble floors, arranged marriages, and the father who measured love in assets. I was just a woman with dirt on her hands and a smile she couldn't hide. And by the time summer painted the town in gold, I realized I was falling in love, not with the postman, but with the life he represented. Simple, honest, free. It was late autumn when the call came, one of those quiet evenings when the light fades early and the world feels half asleep. Aunt Helen had gone to bed, and I was sitting by the window mending one of Jack's shirts when my phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar, but my heart knew before my mind did. Violet? It was Mother. Her voice trembled the way it always did when she was trying to sound calm. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I'd imagined this call 100 times, but never believed it would really happen. I didn't think you still had my number, I whispered. I always knew where you were, she said quietly. Your father. He knows now too, but he's calmer. Time has passed, and he's not angry anymore. He just wants you home. I almost laughed, though it came out bitter. Home? That house stopped being my home the moment he locked me inside. Violet, please, she said, her voice breaking. He's changed. I spoke to him for days. He understands now that he pushed too hard. He's even agreed to let you choose your own husband. From our circle, of course, but it's a start. Our circle. The same circle that had suffocated me since birth. Men with polished shoes, empty smiles, and last names that came before them like titles. Mother, I said slowly, I already have someone. There was silence on the line, then a sharp inhale. Someone? Yes. His name is Jack. Jack? She repeated, as if the name itself offended her. He's kind, honest, he works hard, and if you and Father want me to come back, you'll have to accept him too. For a long moment, there was only breathing, hers uneven, mine shaking. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller, almost pleading. Violet, we're your family, your only family. Whatever you found there, it can't replace us. Please come home. Just talk to us. You don't have to decide anything tonight. Your father promised to listen. I wanted to hang up. I wanted to tell her she was too late. But then she started crying. Truly crying. The kind of sound I'd never heard from her before. You're our only daughter, she whispered. We can't lose you. And that broke me. Because beneath all the pain and anger, I still loved her. The fragile woman who had spent her life living in my father's shadow, too scared to stand beside him. Maybe she was right. Maybe he really had changed. So I promised to come. Jack offered to go with me, but I refused. It's just a talk, I told him. I'll come back in a few days. He didn't believe me. I saw it in his eyes. But he kissed my forehead and said, Then I'll wait for you, every day, until you do. The next morning, I packed a small bag and boarded the first bus east. As the town disappeared behind the foggy window, I pressed my hand to the glass, hoping I wasn't making the worst mistake of my life. But deep down, I already knew. I was walking straight back into the cage I'd once escaped. The Montgomery mansion looked smaller than I remembered, or maybe I'd just grown since the day I ran away. The marble walls, the iron gates, the fountain that never stopped running. Everything was exactly as I'd left it, frozen in time. But as I stepped inside, I felt that familiar chill crawl up my spine. Mother was waiting for me in the foyer, dressed in soft pastel silk, her eyes puffy from sleepless nights. She hugged me tightly, as if afraid I'd vanish again. For a moment, I let her. Your father's in his office, she said, voice trembling. He's been waiting for you. The same office, the same heavy door, the same smell of cigars and power. I stood there for a second, my hand on the doorknob, wishing I could turn back, but I'd come too far. When I entered, Charles Montgomery looked up from his desk. His expression was unreadable. For the first time in years, he didn't look angry, just calm, almost tender. "Violet," he said, standing up, "you've grown thinner. Wyoming doesn't suit you." "It suits me perfectly," I replied quietly. He gestured toward the armchair. "Sit, let's talk." For a moment, it almost felt like peace. He poured himself a drink, even offered one to me, though I refused. Then, in a steady voice, I told him everything. About Aunt Helen, about the small town, about the garden I tended, and about Jack Whitmore, the man who had given me something no one in that house ever had: kindness. Father listened without interruption, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. But when I said the words, "He's a postman," something in his face changed. A flash of disbelief, then disgust. "A postman?" he repeated slowly, his voice dropping an octave. "You're telling me that after everything I've done for you, the schools, the name, the reputation, you've thrown it all away for a man who delivers mail?" "Father!" "Silence!" he thundered, slamming the glass onto the desk so hard it cracked. "Do you have any idea what people will say? My daughter living with a nobody?" Mother rushed in at the sound, pale and shaking. "Charles, please, she just came back. Don't—" But he didn't listen. His anger had already swallowed the room. He turned to the 2 security guards waiting outside his office. "Take her upstairs," he ordered coldly. "No phone, no visitors. I'll deal with this humiliation myself." "Charles, stop!" my mother cried, stepping in front of him. "You promised—" He slapped her. The sound echoed sharp and cruel. I screamed her name, tried to run to her, but one of the guards grabbed my arm. I struggled, kicked, shouted, but it was useless. "Let me go! You can't do this!" I cried, my voice breaking. Father didn't even look at me. He just adjusted his cufflinks and said, "You'll stay there until you remember who you are." As they dragged me down the hallway, Mother fell to her knees, sobbing. I reached out, desperate, but her face blurred through tears. The door slammed behind me. The lock clicked. And once again, I was a prisoner in my own home, the heiress trapped in a golden cage, screaming into walls that would never answer back. Days blurred into weeks. The same walls, the same silence, the same suffocating sense of déjà vu. Father had kept his word. I had no phone, no contact with the outside world. The only person allowed to enter my room was the maid who brought food twice a day, always silent, always avoiding my eyes. At first, I tried to stay calm. I wrote letters to Aunt Helen and to Jack, long, desperate letters that would never be sent. I pressed them under the floorboard near my bed, hoping one day someone would find them and know the truth. But then came the sickness. It started with dizziness, then exhaustion. Some mornings I couldn't even stand without my vision blurring. My appetite disappeared, replaced by a strange heaviness in my chest. I thought it was stress, or maybe the lack of air. The windows in my room had been locked from the outside. Mother visited once or twice. She looked thinner, older. Every time she came, she whispered, "Just listen to your father, Violet. It will be easier." I wanted to ask her what easier even meant, but the fear in her eyes stopped me. Then one morning I heard shouting outside, real, furious shouting. It came from beyond the gates. I rushed to the window and forced it open just enough to see the driveway below. There, by the iron fence, was Aunt Helen, her face red with anger, her voice trembling as she screamed my name. Beside her stood Jack, his hands gripping the bars so hard I thought they might break. "Violet!" Helen cried. "Violet, answer me!" My heart leapt. "Aunt Helen, Jack!" I screamed back, banging on the glass. Jack's head snapped up. Our eyes met. Even from that distance, I saw the panic, the relief, the love. "Violet!" he shouted. "Are you okay?" Before I could answer, 2 guards appeared. They grabbed Helen's arms, pulling her away from the gate. Jack fought them, shouting my name again and again. I screamed, "I'm here! Don't leave me!" My voice cracked, but it didn't matter. The guards shoved them both toward the road. Helen struggled. "You can't keep her locked up, Charles. She's your daughter, not your prisoner." But Father didn't appear. The guards were enough. Within minutes, they were gone, dragged away like criminals, and I was left staring at the empty road, my throat raw from screaming. An hour later, police cars appeared. I heard the sirens, saw the flashing lights through the curtains. I thought, foolishly, that help had finally come. But after a short conversation at the gate, the officers turned around and left. Money could buy silence. It always had. When evening came, I was lying on the floor, weak and shaking. The door opened and Father entered, his expression unreadable. He closed the door behind him with deliberate calm. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he said softly, too softly. "Bringing shame to this family, parading your foolishness for the whole town to see. I had to pay off the police for God's sake." "I didn't do anything," I shouted. "They came because they care about me, because you've locked me here like a prisoner." His hand struck before I even saw it coming. The pain exploded across my face, and the room spun violently. The last thing I heard was Mother's voice screaming, "Charles, stop!" Then darkness. When I woke up, everything was blurry. A man in a white coat sat beside the bed, checking my pulse. Mother was standing near the door, pale as paper, tears streaming down her face. What happened?" I whispered. My throat hurt. My head felt heavy. The doctor looked uneasy. His eyes flicked toward my mother, then back to me. "Miss Montgomery?" he said carefully. "You need to rest. The stress, the exhaustion, it's not good for you. Or the baby." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. "The what?" Mother pressed her hand to her mouth, sobbing. "You're pregnant, Violet." I froze. The air left my lungs. Pregnant. The word echoed in my head, distant and unreal. My hands instinctively went to my stomach. Still flat, still small, still mine. A fragile spark of hope cut through the fear. But when I looked at my mother's trembling face, I understood something else. This wasn't good news for her. Not here. Not with him. Because in that house, new life wasn't a blessing. It was another thing to control. And I knew, with sudden, terrifying clarity, I had to escape again. Not just for myself this time, but for the tiny heartbeat that didn't yet know the world it was about to enter. When the doctor left, silence wrapped around the room like a shroud. Mother stood by the window, her back to me, trembling hands pressed against the glass. The night outside was calm, so cruelly calm compared to the storm inside me. "Does Father know?" I whispered. She turned, eyes red, and shook her head. "Not yet. The doctor only told him you fainted from exhaustion. He suspects nothing." "Then don't tell him," I said quickly, grabbing her hand. "Please, Mother. He'll use the baby to trap me here. You know he will." She looked down, her voice barely audible. "Violet, he's your father. He's strict, but..." "Strict?" My voice broke. "He locked me in here, hit you, cut me off from everyone I love. If he finds out I'm pregnant, he'll take the child. He'll say it's for my own good, but it'll be for his pride, like everything else in his life." Tears welled in her eyes. "What do you want me to do?" "Help me leave. Tonight. Please, Mother, before it's too late." For a long time, she said nothing. Then quietly, she nodded. "If you go, you can't ever come back. Do you understand?" "I don't want to come back," I whispered. That night, after the house fell asleep and Father's heavy steps faded down the hall, she returned to my room. She brought a coat, a small envelope of cash, and my grandmother's old ring. "I can't protect you if he finds out," she said softly, her voice shaking. "But you can still protect your child." I hugged her tightly. She smelled like lavender and fear. "I love you, Mother," I whispered. She led me through the servants' corridor to the back garden, where the side gate stood open. For the first time in years, I saw stars instead of chandeliers. "Go," she whispered. "Don't look back." I didn't. I walked until my legs gave out, until the city lights faded behind me. By morning, I reached the train station with nothing but the coat on my shoulders and the future in my belly. 2 days later, I arrived in Wyoming. The air smelled of dust and rain, familiar, gentle, forgiving. And standing there on the edge of the platform was Jack. He didn't ask how I got there or what had happened. He just pulled me into his arms and I felt the world stop spinning for the first time in months. When I finally told him about the baby, his eyes filled with tears. "Then we'll raise him here," he said simply. "In the old house. It's not much, but it's ours." We moved into the small wooden home that once belonged to his grandparents. Creaky floors, mismatched furniture, the faint scent of old pine in every room. The walls carried years of laughter and love, the kind I'd never known growing up. It wasn't luxury, but it was peace. Jack worked mornings at the post office and came home with stories of neighbors and small-town gossip. I spent my days sewing curtains, growing flowers outside, and feeling life move quietly inside me. For the first time, silence didn't scare me. Months passed, and one spring morning, under the soft light coming through the cracked window, I gave birth to a boy, our Oliver. When I held him tiny and warm against my chest, I thought, this is home. Not the mansion I'd escaped, not the name I'd lost, but this small house filled with the sound of his breathing and the smell of wildflowers from the window. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the heiress, or the runaway, or the disappointment. I was simply a mother, and I was free. The years that followed weren't easy, but they were ours. The roof leaked when it rained, the heater coughed and rattled every winter, and sometimes Jack came home too tired to even eat. Yet I never complained. After a lifetime of living under marble ceilings, I had finally found peace beneath creaking wooden beams. I learned to live without silk sheets and servants, without diamonds and dinners. I learned to mend clothes by candlelight, to cook soup that stretched through the week, to smile even when my hands were raw from scrubbing floors. Poverty wasn't frightening anymore. What frightened me was the thought of ever going back. Jack was my world, and Oliver was the light that made it worth spinning. Our boy grew fast. Messy curls, bright eyes, laughter that filled the house like sunlight. Sometimes, when I watched him sleep, I imagined a future without fear. But peace, in my life, never stayed for long. One evening, Jack kissed my forehead and said, "I'll take a few extra shifts tonight. They're short-handed at the depot." I smiled, told him to be careful, and watched from the window as he disappeared down the road on his bicycle. Oliver was already asleep, clutching his little stuffed bear. I tidied up, humming softly, the house quiet except for the ticking clock. And then, a knock. At first it was gentle, then louder, insistent. I opened the door halfway. Two men stood there, coats dark with rain, their faces expressionless. One of them held a folder. "Mrs. Whitmore?" the taller one asked. "Yes?" "We're here from Child Protective Services. There's been a report." My chest tightened. "A report of what?" He exchanged a glance with his partner. "Neglect, malnutrition, alcohol abuse." For a moment, I couldn't even process it. "That's absurd," I said. "My son is healthy. He ate dinner an hour ago. You can see for yourself." The second man stepped forward, already scanning the room. "Ma'am, please step aside." "No," I said firmly. "You're mistaken. Who told you?" But then I saw it. The papers in his hand, stamped and signed. And at the bottom of the page, under the seal of the county court, was a name I would never forget. Charles Montgomery. My knees went weak. "He did this," I whispered. "My father, he did this." They didn't answer. They didn't need to. "I'm not drunk," I cried. "I've done nothing wrong." They moved past me anyway. One of them went straight to the bedroom. I followed, panicking. "Please, don't wake him. He's only 3. Oliver stirred, blinking at the strangers. "Mama?" I tried to reach him, but the taller man blocked me. "Ma'am, you're making this harder than it needs to be." I screamed until my voice cracked. "Don't touch him! He's my son! You can't take him!" The neighbors' lights flickered on, curtains shifting in quiet curiosity, but no one came. No one ever comes. They carried him out wrapped in his blanket, his small arms reaching for me. "Mama!" he cried. "Mama, where are they taking me?" I fell to my knees in the mud, begging, pleading, clawing at their sleeves, but they didn't look back. The car doors slammed, the engine roared, and the red taillights vanished into the darkness. When Jack returned hours later, he found me outside, barefoot, soaked in rain, holding Oliver's toy bear. I couldn't even speak. He just dropped to the ground beside me, his hands shaking as he whispered, "No, no, Violet. Tell me this isn't real." But it was real. The next morning, we went to the police. They showed us the same documents, the same false reports, the same forged signatures, the same lies wrapped in legal truth. We didn't stand a chance. My father had taken everything from me once before, but this time, he took what was left of my soul. It's been 2 years since that night. 2 years of courtrooms, rejections, lawyers who won't fight against a man with that much power. 2 years of watching my son grow up in newspapers and photographs, the heir to Montgomery Industries. Sometimes I still stand by the window of the old house, holding his bear, waiting for a sound that will never come, a bicycle, a knock, a laugh. But the world is quiet now, and I have learned one cruel truth. You can run from wealth, from power, from a name, but not from the blood that made you its prisoner.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and explore our channel for more love, betrayal, and redemption tales.